Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready.
This one's pretty special though. We're marking a big anniversary, a century in fact.
The 100th anniversary of the discovery of the Harappan civilization. Can you believe it's been that long?
100 years of uncovering this ancient world. It's incredible. And we've got a ton of research and news articles to really get into it. Sort of a crash course on everything Harappan.
Definitely. A one-stop shop for all your Harappan knowledge needs.
So, Harappan civilization, remind me again, how far back are we talking?
We're talking about 3300 to 1300 BCE.
Roughly. Okay, so over 4,000 years ago. Got it.
And this wasn't just a small settlement, right?
Oh, no, not at all. We're talking a vast area across modern-day India and Pakistan, even parts of Afghanistan.
Seriously. That's massive. I always pictured it as much smaller, more concentrated. Was it all clustered together or spread out?
Think of it as centered around the Indus and Saraswati river basins.
The lifelines of any civilization, right?
Exactly. And the sheer number of sites is astounding. Over 2,000 identified. Wow. Okay, so huge area, lots of sites. When we're talking about the Harappan civilization, is there a way to break down its history? Like, were there different periods or eras?
Good question. The way we typically understand it is in three phases: early, mature, and late Harappan.
Early, mature, and late. Makes sense. So what defined those periods?
Well, the early period, starting around 3300 BCE, laid the foundation. Think of it as the building blocks. But the mature period is where it gets really interesting.
The mature period, when was that?
That's from 2600 to 1900 BCE.
Okay. And why is that period so important?
Well, that's when the Harappan civilization truly flourished. Cities were booming, trade expanded, and we see all these incredible innovations emerging. It's what we typically associate with the Harappan civilization.
Oh, so the mature period is like their greatest hits album.
That's a great analogy. And then, of course, there's the late Harappan period. Things started to wind down around 1900 BCE, lasting until about 1300 BCE.
Classic rise and fall. Okay, so let's get into those greatest hits then. What made the mature Harappan period so unique? What blew people's minds when they first uncovered this civilization?
Their cities. Even today, their urban planning is mind-blowing. Entire cities laid out in a grid pattern. Neat, organized, efficient.
Like a perfectly planned neighborhood. That's not what comes to mind when I think ancient city.
I know, right? And their building material was interesting, too. Burnt mud bricks.
Mud bricks, were those strong enough?
Oh, yeah, they were durable, especially with the gypsum mortar they used to bind them.
Okay, so different from the dried bricks they used in other places.
Very different, like in Egypt, for example. So this shows a real understanding of building for the long term.
Smart. Okay, so sturdy houses, organized streets. But what about the necessities? Plumbing, for example.
Get this. They had a very sophisticated underground drainage system. Think about it. Every house connected to street drains. Amazing sanitation for the time.
Hold on, are you telling me they had indoor plumbing thousands of years ago? My apartment building could learn a thing or two from them.
It really is incredible. And that's just one aspect. They also had massive citadels, granaries for storing food.
Makes sense. You've got to keep those harvests safe.
Absolutely. And they even had public structures, like the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro.
I've heard about that. It's a giant pool, right?
A huge pool,
Yeah.
intricately built, thought to be used for rituals. It really showcases their architectural skills.
Okay, ritual baths, organized streets, strong houses. Sounds like a pretty comfy setup. But all this urban living had to be fueled by some serious agriculture, right?
You're absolutely right. They were very skilled farmers. They cultivated wheat, barley, rice.
The essentials?
Yes, and get this, they were the first in the world to produce cotton.
Whoa, seriously. So the clothes I'm wearing today, that's a connection to the Harappan civilization.
You got it. It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. I never realized cotton had such ancient roots. So they were agricultural pioneers and then...
And they were masters of animal domestication, too. Oxen, buffalo, sheep, goats, even camels.
Camels! Wow. So they had a pretty good grasp of animal husbandry then.
It seems so. They clearly understood the importance of animals, both for food and for their economy.
So we've got master farmers, incredible city planners. I'm sensing a pattern here. Tell me they were amazing traders, too.
You know it. Their trade networks were vast, both within the civilization and far beyond. Mesopotamia, Afghanistan, Iran, they were connected.
A global network, basically. But how did they manage all that trade, especially back then?
Well, they were highly organized. They had standardized weights and measures.
Ah, so everyone was on the same page. Smart.
Very smart. This system made trade much smoother. contributed to their success, I'd say.
Okay, so they were urban planners, farmers, global traders. I'm seeing a theme here. But what about their culture? What did they believe in? What were their rituals like?
Well, that's where things get a bit more mysterious. But those famous Harappan seals give us some clues.
The seals. Tell me about those.
They were small, intricately carved objects, mostly made from steatite.
Steatite. That sounds fancy.
It's a kind of soft stone, perfect for carving. And they use these seals for lots of things, like marking ownership or goods, almost like ancient trademarks or signatures, you could say.
Oh, interesting. So they press them into clay or wax?
Exactly. And the images on those seals are fascinating. They show us deities, animals, all sorts of things. Gives us glimpses into their beliefs.
Like little windows into their world. Did they build temples for their gods?
That's the interesting thing. No temple structures have been found.
Really? That is interesting. So we're not sure how their rituals worked.
It's still a mystery. Maybe they had designated spaces we haven't found yet, or perhaps their religious practices were more individualistic. We just don't know.
Intriguing. It's amazing how much we still haven't uncovered. Speaking of mysteries, what about their writing? It's famous for being undeciphered, right?
It is a puzzle that's baffled experts for decades. We know it's pictographic, with symbols representing words or ideas,
Like hieroglyphs.
sort of. But despite so many attempts, no one has cracked the code yet.
Wow, so all those symbols are just waiting to spill their secrets? That's incredible.
Imagine what we could learn if we could just read them. It's like having a library full of books but not knowing the language.
Talk about a historical cliffhanger. It really makes you realize just how much we still don't know. But even with these gaps in our knowledge, it's clear that the Harappan civilization is incredibly significant.
Absolutely. A cornerstone of South Asian history and culture.
A cornerstone with some missing pieces, it seems. Okay, so we've got this advanced civilization thriving for centuries. But like all good stories, there's got to be some twists and turns, right?
Yeah.
What challenges do researchers face when trying to understand the Harappans?
That's where this deep dive gets even more fascinating.
Right, so we ended on a bit of a cliffhanger. What are the biggest hurdles when it comes to understanding the Harappans?
Well, we talked about that undeciphered script, right? That's a big one.
Yeah, it's almost cruel, all those secrets locked away in those symbols.
It really is. It leaves us with so many questions about their beliefs, their politics, even their daily lives. We can see what they did, but we don't know why.
The why is always the most interesting part, isn't it? So that's one challenge. What else?
Their social structure, it's a real puzzle. We see evidence of cities, different types of houses, so there was some kind of hierarchy.
Makes sense. Not everyone could live in those fancy grid pattern neighborhoods, I guess.
Right. But we haven't found anything that points to a clear ruling class. No palaces, no grand tombs filled with treasures.
So no kings or emperors, no all-powerful rulers. Did they have some kind of democracy?
It's possible, but we just don't know for sure. It's really intriguing. And then there's the role of women. We see these beautiful depictions of women in their art on those seals.
There's no written records to tell us what those depictions meant.
Exactly. So we're left to speculate about their status, their rights, their place in society. It's frustrating, but it also makes it even more exciting to keep digging for answers.
It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, and we're still missing a bunch of pieces. And speaking of missing pieces, has this made it difficult to figure out how the Harappan civilization actually ended?
Absolutely. The decline of the Harappan civilization is one of the biggest mysteries. Lots of theories, but no definitive answers.
Okay, lay it on me. What are the top contenders for their downfall?
Well, environmental factors are high on the list. Remember, they were heavily reliant on those river systems.
Right, the Indus and the Saraswati.
Exactly. So any major change to those rivers could have been devastating. Flooding, drying up, even a shift in the river's course.
Makes sense. Their whole civilization was built around those rivers.
It was. And some experts believe a massive drought could have been the culprit. Others point to gradual climate change, making their environment less hospitable over time.
A bit of a cautionary tale for us, don't you think? Especially with climate change being such a hot topic today.
Definitely makes you think. And then there's the possibility of internal struggles. Maybe their political system weakened, or they faced economic problems like changes in trade routes or dwindling resources.
So it wasn't just about outside forces, but maybe issues within the civilization itself. Interesting.
It's likely a combination of factors. But figuring out the exact sequence of events Well, that might be impossible.
Hmm.
And of course, there are the practical challenges of excavating these sites. Modern development encroaching on ancient areas, political boundaries making it difficult to access certain locations.
Right, it's not like archaeologists have free reign to dig wherever they want.
Exactly. So it's a constant battle against time, against the elements, against bureaucracy, but it's a battle worth fighting, especially when you consider all the amazing discoveries they're still making, like that 5,200-year-old settlement we talked about.
Oh yeah, and that DNA analysis. Those are pretty groundbreaking, right?
Absolutely. That settlement in Gujarat pushes back the timeline of the Harappan civilization even further. It suggests they were already established along the coast, potentially engaging in maritime trade.
So the story is getting longer and more complex. It must be exciting for researchers to uncover something like that. What was so significant about the DNA analysis?
Well, they analyzed skeletons from Rakhigarhi, one of the largest Harappan sites, and what they found was a direct genetic link to the present-day South Asian population.
So people living in that region today are literally descended from the Harappans. Talk about a connection to the past.
I know, it's amazing. And then there's all the buzz about renaming Port Blair to Sri Vijayapuram.
Right, that was big news. A move away from a colonial name to something that reflects India's own history. Can you remind us why Srivijayapuram is so significant?
Well, Srivijaya was this powerful maritime empire centered in Southeast Asia, known for its trade and for spreading Buddhism throughout the region.
So choosing this name for Port Blair is a way of reclaiming their heritage.
Exactly. It highlights India's historical connections and influence in the region. It's a powerful statement.
It's fascinating how history is constantly being rewritten, reinterpreted. And the Harappans, with all their mysteries and achievements, continue to challenge our understanding of the past.
Absolutely. But there's another layer to this. We've talked about what makes the Harappan civilization so fascinating, so unique. But what can we actually learn from them? What insights can we apply to our own world, our own challenges today?
That's a great question. Can a civilization that existed thousands of years ago really offer any wisdom for us in the 21st century?
You might be surprised.
You've got me curious. Can we really learn something from a civilization that existed thousands of years ago?
Oh, I think so. The Harappans, even though they lived in a very different time, their experience holds some pretty relevant lessons for us, especially when you think about things like city planning, sustainability,
Mhm.
even their social structures.
Okay, you've got my attention. Let's start with their cities. We've talked about how well planned they were, but what can we actually learn from that? I mean, our cities today are completely different.
Well, think about it this way. Imagine a city where sanitation is a top priority, not just something they tacked on later.
Okay.
The Harappans had that figured out. Their drainage systems were incredible. The level of hygiene they achieved, it's something a lot of cities today still struggle with.
Yeah, that's true. I'm remembering that plumbing issue in my building last month. Not fun, so good plumbing. What else?
Well, they understood that a city needs to function as a whole, everything connected. Their street grid, how they manage their water, even those public spaces. It was all designed to work together efficiently.
Right. It's not just about throwing up a bunch of buildings and hoping for the best. So, what else can we learn from their city planning?
Public spaces, they made them an integral part of the city. The Great Bath, those granaries, they were designed for everyone, for the community as a whole.
It's easy to forget that sometimes. We get so focused on individual needs, we lose sight of the bigger picture.
Exactly. And there's another thing. They were all about using local materials, those burnt mud bricks. That's a pretty big lesson for us today as we try to figure out sustainable construction.
Building with what's available. Sustainable and probably save them some money too. Okay, I'm starting to see why they were so successful. But what about their society? Their social structure? We've talked about how they might have been more egalitarian. What can we learn from that?
It's hard to say for sure, of course. Without that written language, we're missing a big piece of the puzzle.
Right, the why is always the hardest to figure out.
Exactly. But from what we can see, they seem to have a system where resources were distributed more fairly.
Less about look at all my wealth and more about let's work together.
That's the idea. And maybe that's something we should think about today, especially with all the inequality and division we're seeing.
Makes you wonder if the Harakkans could see our world today, what would they think?
It's fun to imagine, isn't it?
I think they'd be pretty amazed by our technology, all the information we have access to.
Oh, for sure. Instant communication across the globe. That would probably blow their minds.
But I also wonder if they'd be concerned by some of the ways we use that technology, the impact on the environment, the way it can isolate us instead of bringing us together.
Yeah, I think they might point that out. They might remind us that true progress isn't just about technology. It's about balance. Balance with nature, with each other.
Balance. It's a powerful message. And coming from a civilization that thrived for centuries, well, maybe we should pay attention.
I think so.
Hmm.
And who knows what other insights we might uncover as we continue to learn more about them.
That's the exciting part. Well, this has been an amazing journey, a real eye-opener.
I agree.
And it's incredible to think that even after 100 years, the Harappan civilization still holds so much mystery, so much to teach us.
A reminder that history is never truly finished.
That's a great way to put it. To all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the world of the Harappans as much as we have.
And until next time, keep exploring.